What's going on, everybody? Joe here with Excursion Cuts. In tonight's episode of our series on color correction and color grading, we're going to be covering skin tones. So if you're new to the world of color correction and color grading, if you've sought any kind of critique on your work, most of the critiques are probably directed towards skin tone. And before I move on, I want to kind of argue some semantics here. Human skin varies in tone. What I mean by that is some skin can be dark, some skin can be light, some skin can be kind of in the middle. That's tone. Where it doesn't vary a whole lot is color. People are basically orange. You can have a little bit of variation of reds and yellows in there. Some people are a little bit more red, perhaps have rosy cheeks. You can get a little bit more of a yellowish tint to the skin, but for the most part, you can just consider people are orange. Now, when you hear the words skin tone, sometimes, I should say most of the time, it's used in the context of skin color. So for example, if you were to apply a grade to a look and share it on an online forum and try to get some feedback from some experienced colorists, they may say your skin tones look off. What they really mean is your skin color looks off. They're not saying your skin is too dark, your skin is too light. They're really referring to color. So let's just kind of get that out of the way. What's interesting about skin tone is, as I mentioned, we can have variations in tone, that is lightness or darkness, but people are orange. And I do want to take this opportunity to introduce you to a new scope. We have covered the RGB parade over here, which gives us information on luminance and how balanced color is, such as your white balance. Kind of focus your attention on this one right here. This is called the vector scope, and this is a pretty slick scope. This scope doesn't tell us anything about luminance. It focuses solely on hue and saturation. So what this is telling me right now, if I just were to look at this scope and ignore the actual image, the trace right here is over here in between blue and cyan. It's very much balanced in that cyan and blue direction. So I could tell by looking at the vector scope without even seeing the image that this has a blue color cast to it. Okay, now you'll probably notice this diagonal line that's kind of between red and yellow and heading down this way right here. On a lot of vector scopes in different apps, this is actually referred to as the skin line. So basically, the more trace I can get right here on this skin line, the more accurate my skin color will look. As with everything else, there are exceptions to what I'm about to discuss with you, but generally speaking, one of the main jobs of a colorist is going to be to get the skin color to look accurate. And the reason for this is, again, generally speaking, if my skin color and skin tone look accurate, I can get away with some pretty heavy stylized grades everywhere else in the image and have it come across as believable. So we're going to strive for that. And again, towards the end of this tutorial, I will mention some situations in which you can absolutely get away with having your skin tones look completely off, meaning not orange. They can be other colors, blue, red, whatever. But again, for right now, let's just focus on getting things to look accurate. Now, I deliberately screwed up this shot. I went into my color grading app, which we're going to dive into in a minute, and I swung this very much over to the blue. And if you look over here at the RGB parade, that's apparent. Okay, we've got the blue way up here by 1. We've got our red down here on the left. This is also apparent in the vector scope. This entire image is blue, which means her skin doesn't look orange. Now, I'm going to go ahead and open up our color grading app. So again, to reiterate, I did add this warm cool filter down here to shift the color around a little bit, so created a blue color cast, just for the sake of kind of explaining where we're headed with correcting skin tone or skin color. So this scope right here, again, vector scope, I just showed you one that was in Premiere. This is with Magic Bullet Looks, and this actually has a very defined skin line right here, if you can see right here on the vector scope. So what we need to do is push this trace a little bit more so that it lines up with this skin tone, or excuse me, with this skin line, so that our skin tones and skin color look accurate. Magic Bullet Looks, if you guys are not familiar, it has this really slick skin overlay. If I toggle this on, what this is an orange grid that will go over anything that it recognizes as skin color. And as you can see, there isn't a whole lot of this on her face right now. There's actually more of it on this post. It basically thinks that this post is closer to skin color than her actual skin. Shut this off. Another scope that's not as common, we do use it in Magic Bullet Looks, is called memory colors. And I have covered this in previous tutorials. This is a pretty slick scope and I use this quite a bit. Basically what it is it uses 4 colors to overlay on your image to give you an idea of what's what, meaning what color is what in your image. As you can see, this is predominantly blue. What it's saying is, right now the sky looks blue, the hills look blue, her jacket looks blue, her hair looks blue, the shadows look blue. It can also look this kind of faint right here, but it can kind of look this peach color. That is skin. So basically using the memory color scope, if we start shifting colors around, we should see more of her face covered by this peachish color. Okay, red is red, and by the way, green is green. And you can see in the memory color scope, nothing in this image is green. So these trees and everything should look green in the memory colors. So let's focus on skin. First things first, I'm going to actually just shut this off and show you what this does. Let's go back up to the vector scope. Take a look at this trace right here. The second I get rid of this filter, things change. Things start pushing in the right direction. Now, yes, we look like we're overall fairly warm, but let's head back down to the memory colors and see what her face looks like. This looks a lot better. We've got more of her face now covered with this peach overlay. There's peach trace. Okay, so how do we approach this? When it comes to editing skin tone and skin color, you can come at it from one of 2 directions. We can apply a global edit, that is an edit that affects the image as a whole, and just try to shift this trace of orange closer to the skin line to get accurate skin tones. The other thing we can do is we can do local adjustments. That is, isolate the skin from the rest of the image and edit it independently of the rest of the image. There are situations when editing the skin tones independently of the rest of the image is absolutely called for, and if you guys are DaVinci Resolve users, you know that you can qualify the skin and just have a node devoted strictly to skin tone and skin color. But it's not always necessary, to be quite honest, and if you're doing something simple like travel photography and travel videography, you can probably get away with global adjustments, especially when you're coming off the truck looking like this, meaning if this is coming right out of the camera, we're already pretty close to that skin line. And even just glancing at the image, while it does look like it's a little bit washed out, kind of lacking in the contrast department, her skin does look like it's the right color, or at least pretty close to it. So let's just kind of take a look here. I'm going to first edit other parts of my image. I'm going to kind of cover some of the stuff that we did in previous tutorials where I'm just going to work on my tone here. I'm going to drop those blacks a little bit, stretch out the tonal range. This will, in turn, affect my color, by the way, so boost the contrast here. It's a little saturated, so I'm actually going to pull the saturation down a little bit. If you look at the vector scope, I'm going to crank this up. Do you see how the trace went over here to the walls? This has basically reached a point of oversaturation, which is pretty apparent. If you look at the image, the sky looks unnaturally blue, and her face looks unnaturally orange. So let's pull this back. Yes. We'll say 95 for right now. That's pretty saturated too. Let's pull this back to 90. Okay. Come back down here to memory colors. Now, most of her face is still within this range. This is good. Now, all we've done is adjusted tone and contrast, but in turn what that does is it does tend to boost the saturation of certain parts of the image, which is why I dropped it over here on this slider. But let's go ahead and start pushing color around. Let's cool off the shadows maybe a little bit. It's a winter shot. Now, I've cooled off the shadows. I can do something similar to the midtones. Pull those more towards cyan. Give it a cooler look. But now let's see what happens to the memory colors. Now we're a little bit closer. We're actually starting to get some green over here in the trees, which is what we want. Her skin tones still look okay, so her skin color still looks okay. I will add that her lips look very red, which is normal. People's lips do look red. But she also has some red over here at the base of her glasses. However, the shades of her glasses have a kind of natural red or orange hue to it, so that's okay. I'm not too worried about that. We do see some red in here on the memory colors. I might be able to fix that a little bit, and here's what you can do. If you have an HSL tool within your toolkit, if you take your red and you shift the hue towards orange, take a look at that memory colors scope over there. you see how we're reducing some of that red and replacing it with skin color? Now, the scopes are telling me that the skin looks okay. If you ask me, her face is starting to look a little bit yellow. So I'm actually going to pull this back a little bit and introduce a little bit more red into the skin. This is where you really kind of have to play and know your subject, by the way. I did mention that some people do have a little bit more red in their face than others. Some people also have a little bit more yellow in their face, even though people are predominantly orange. So looking around here, now again, I know her, I married her, so I know what her skin looks like. I'm gonna go ahead and just tweak this red until it looks natural to me. Okay, so with a couple of basic adjustments right here, we've got this at least closer to that skin line. Now, I'm going to introduce a little bit more red into the highlights, or orange into the highlights, and see if we might be able to swing that trace around, which we are. See that moving down there from the yellow right here, closer to that skin line when I push the highlights towards orange. Okay, looks like we're heading in a better direction there. Now, I could also take the mid-tones. If we were focusing strictly on skin tone, I'm going to start pushing this towards orange. Look what's happening to that trace and how it's headed more towards that skin line. Okay, now, here's the point I want to make for you guys. Looking at the trace, the majority of it is right now on that skin line. Technically, skin should look accurate, and if I turn on this skin overlay, we're getting most of it. Now, it's also covering other parts of the image, which is okay. Like I said, if we wanted to edit the skin independently of the posts and the fur on her jacket, we could absolutely do that. But I think in this particular case, the skin tone looks accurate as far as how dark it is and how bright it is. The skin color might be a little bit intense, a little bit too saturated. So if we come again down to our HSL, take orange, this is going to adjust brightness, okay? So if I crank this up or pull it down, you can see what it's doing to tone. But I might actually just reduce the saturation a little bit so it doesn't look... I'll show you the extreme of this. You can see how we're sucking color out of her face. But if I just pull it back a little bit so it doesn't look so orange, that might be a little bit better. Let's take a look at that. Yeah, that looks a little bit more accurate. Okay, so if you'll allow me to go ahead and demonstrate the isolation of skin tones and skin color, I'm going to go ahead and apply a really obvious grade to this image. Give it more of a winter look with the blues. We've definitely cooled this off. I think I'm going to drop the luminance of the blues, actually make the skies a little bit darker, and maybe bump up the saturation on the blues a little bit. Now this has affected her skin tones. In fact, if I come down here, the trace looks like it's lined up a little bit with this with the skin line, but I think if we go down to the memory colors, yeah, she looks more red than anything else. Now, again, I'm just going to demonstrate isolation. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. This is easy enough to do with still frames. You know, if you're in Photoshop, you can always paint effects directly onto the skin. But with video, things move. People move, your camera moves. So the form that this takes in the video world is called keying. Basically, keying is you're going to isolate, you're going to select a certain color range. In this case, skin tones and skin color. And that will basically follow your subject around the image and apply the same edit as they move or as the camera moves. So I'm going to apply a different effect for this. I'm going to apply Colorista, also with Red Giant, by the way. Okay, if I come in here and I click on Edit for Key, you can see right here is Key. Okay, so I'm not going to get into the specifics of Colorista's keying effect, but I just wanted you to kind of take a look at what's going on right here. This is a matte just to show you what's selected and what isn't. Anything that's white is selected. Anything that's black is not selected and won't be affected by any of our edits once we close out of here. So basically in here I've got plus to add some selection or minus to subtract. So if I add plus and just kind of drag around on her skin, you can see down here that yes, her face got a little bit whiter, meaning more selected, but so did her hood. And that's because the hood and her skin are pretty close in color. So I can try to subtract a little bit of the hood, but I will probably end up affecting the face as well. Actually, we did okay there. Go ahead and maybe add just a tad more of that face. Okay, this looks pretty good. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna add some softness. And what this will do is add some subtle blurring to the mask. This isn't gonna blur the skin, mind you. It's just gonna blur the mask. You can see what's happening down here so that there isn't such a hard cutoff of your selection and it looks a little bit more natural. So once I close out of here, Anything that I do in Colorista right now will only affect her face. Okay, so it's important to note that with this particular shot, her skin tones are not that far off. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, we wanted to add a little bit more warmth into her skin. If I come over here to the midtones, and by the way, human skin generally falls within the midtones, if we lift this up and push it more towards orange, here's the extreme, so we can see how we're affecting her. See that? Push a little bit of warmth in there. We can also do the same thing with the highlights. Again, any edit we do, here's temperature. If I start moving this left or right, we're going to be affecting her skin only. You can see the trace on the vector scope going toward and away from the skin line. So in the last tutorial, I really stressed the point of considering how your environment and the lighting in that environment is going to affect your subject, and try to, grade your footage accordingly. So I will leave you with this. While striving for accurate skin tones is pretty common, pretty typical of your grade, bear in mind where they are. I mean, it kind of makes sense. This is winter. I tried to go for a cooler look, but I still want her skin to look somewhat natural, because if I did a blue color wash on this image, it's basically going to look like a mistake. It's going to look like I blew it with white balance when I was filming. But by keeping her skin tones and skin color looking natural, this looks more intentional, looks a little bit more cinematic. And to be quite honest, because blue is a complementary color to orange, her face sticks out more, and it's more obvious that she is the subject of the image as opposed to the landscape. Now, what if this were set in a dance club, and there were blue and purple and red lights everywhere shining on her face? It wouldn't make any sense for her skin to be orange. It would make more sense for her skin to be blue, purple, or red. So keep those things in mind when you guys are color grading your images. I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you're new to Excursion Cuts, consider subscribing to this channel so you'll be up to date whenever I post new videos. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.